Velixo is an Excel-based reporting tool that links into your Acumatica GL, generic inquiry, and project data. We'll talk about the basics of how it works, discussing the connections, the simplicity of the formulas, the power of Velixo in reporting without the clutter, and how to tap into your GIs that Andy just talked about and use them in Excel. All of this will revolve around a common theme, and that's the ease with which Velixo can fulfill your reporting needs within Excel. So first, we're going to talk about our connections. It's very simple. We just hit our connection manager. We give it a name, our URL, the tenant we want to hook into, our username, and then the password for that username, which I'm going to put in now. And it's going to think for a second. And now we're hooked into the tenant that we chose. Next, let's talk about the parameters page. And at the top, you can see in blue our connection. It's a named cell to let us reference it later. The same is true with our ledger, our actual ledger. And then we have all of the dates that we may need along the way in named cells and the branch list that we'll see later. This page is incredibly important as you build out your reports because it allows you to create those validation lists and quickly and easily call back to the data that you need as you need it. So now that we've talked about our parameters, let's talk about a trial balance. We all know how important it is to have a trial balance that actually balances. So let's see how easy it is to create one. In order to do that, we just put in a simple expand account range formula, give it the connection from our parameters page, the range that we want to pull from, which is going to be all of our accounts in this instance, and we'll tell it false so that it doesn't pull any inactive accounts. So what it did is it went out to the tenant that we were using and it pulled every single active account in the system. Now let's give it an account name because I don't know my accounts by heart. I'm sure there's some of you that do, but that's not me. So we're going to give it the connection again, our account, close the parentheses, and copy that down. And it's going to show us the names for each and every one of those accounts that we have. Now we need our total debits and credits. So there's a formula for that as well. Account total debits, give it our connection from our parameters page, ledger from the page as well. We don't have an account class in this instance, but we do have our account, and we're going to column lock that. No sub account, no branch for this report, and then we're going to pull our current period over from our parameters page as well. And when we copy that down, it's going to populate all of the data for the current period. Now I'm just going to copy this formula over and change our debits to credits. Copy that formula down. And at first, this won't balance because we still have our net income account in here. It's quite easy to remove that. We just go up to the top and say, hey, we don't want that account in here anymore. And now we'll have a balanced trial balance. So now that we've seen something a little bit more simple, let's take a look at something that looks more complex on the surface, but isn't necessarily that way when we dive into it. Beyond the data and formatting needs, obviously. It is a great way to present our data in a way that is less cluttered and provides less meaningless rows. This formula is exactly what it says it is. It's your accounts and sub-accounts in the system that have historical data for the period in which you're looking at. It goes through and it creates the list for our account range, as you see up here in light blue. And it fulfills that data as we need it. This cuts what would seemingly be an endless report down into a much more succinct and easy to understand report showing us only what we need. And since I've thrown filters on here, we can turn off all of them and just look at our food items, for example. And now we have month to date versus budget variances for the monthly food items sub-account. Now that we've seen what our with history formulas can do for us, let's take a look at another way that Velixo lets us clean up our data. This actually still has it on, which is nice, but I want to show you how it works. So we're going to turn our name manager off and delete our auto hide feature because that's the tool that we're going to talk about. And as you will see, once I unhide, apologies. There we go. I had this all set up. There we go. So now you can see that there's a bunch of rows here that have $0 values. And we don't really want to see those because they don't mean anything to us. So now we're going to use that auto hide feature again that I just turned off to create a named range that's going to automatically hide all of your zeros in the data that you've selected. If I select a branch, for example, products retail, it's going to go through and just pull the data that has non-zero values. So no more long reports, no more, parsing through $0 values, and no more having to stare at things that don't mean anything to you. Now that we've talked a little bit about our branches, we can go to the distribution list and learn about the new features with this. So they've recently added and made more robust their distribution features. It used to be that if you wanted to send all of your branches out to, the CFO, you had to do it line by line. So in order for me to send branches to each of these to my CFO, I would have had to set it up like this, give it a name, select a tab, and a person to email it to. Now they've allowed us to combine our branches into a single Excel file with, in this case, 5 different tabs. So if I hit distribute all, it's going to create that single Excel file and think for a little bit and produce 5 tabs of data over in my drafts here. And if I open that up, it's going to give me all of the data for each of those branches on its own tab once it loads. And that auto hide feature is still active. So as we tab through each of these, we can see that it is just the data for each branch with no zero values and no clutter. So let me close this. Finally, like Andy talked about before, we have generic inquiries. An effective tool built into Acumatica, we can tap them using Velixo and make them even more powerful. As you can see over here, I've got a whole bunch of filters and data columns that we want the generic inquiry to pull over. For example, if I only want to see things over $5,000, I can filter that down, and it's going to remove anything that is under $5,000 in my generic inquiry. Let's put this back to 0, and it reverses it, so it puts it back, and we see everything again. This data that you see here is also pivotable. So if I go over here and I give this a quick refresh, I don't think there's any new data in there, but this field or this pivot table is obviously able to be drilled down into as a normal pivot table would, and we can select from our chart the Church of the Apostles and see what makes up their AR balance. I have a reference number, a customer, a date, a total amount, and the branch, which was all provided from my generic inquiry. Obviously, this tool in this specific instance is, valuable if your AR manager doesn't have a preset dashboard made by Andy in Acumatica, but it gives them an easy access, refreshable interface that provides them with, whatever data they would normally see in their invoices and memos GA. This was just a quick glance at what Velixo can do, but the options are as endless as you can imagine. As long as Excel can do it, Velixo can do it too. And that's the great part, and the greatest part about all of it is it really is that easy.